Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Breaking the Mold Volume 2, presented by the Tackle Talk podcast. This four-part series is dedicated to four tackle companies who are pushing the envelope of bait design and bringing unique, innovative products to market. On today's episode, we are joined by the owner of Black Label Tackle, Cliff Pace. Episode 4 of Breaking the Mold Volume 2 starts right now.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Dance, and you're listening to Tackle Talk.
Welcome to the Tackle Talk podcast, brought to you by American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors. World-class fishing gear, unmatched personal service. Now, here's your host, Andrew Hayes.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another very special episode of the Tackle Talk podcast as we bring you episode 4 of Breaking the Mold Volume 2, which we will get to in just a second. But first, the Tackle Talk podcast is presented by American Legacy Fishing. And we've got some big news from ALF. We've told you the past couple weeks. In addition to stocking your favorite rods, reels, line, baits, apparel, American Legacy Fishing now offers installation services. So if you have a boat anywhere near Indiana, the guys at American Legacy Fishing can now rig your boat out for you. And that means power pole installation. That means installing your graphs and your wiring, stack mounts, transducers, lithium batteries, chargers, sea deck padding, and even boat cleaning and detailing. The guys at ALF even told us that right now they're currently taking trades on select trolling motors and electronics. So if you have some of those sitting around, you can trade those into ALF for cash to be used for other things as well. Add all of that to the giant list of benefits that you already know from ALF, like a price match guarantee, the internet's best selection of gently used fishing gear, the easiest trade-in program for your old rods and reels on the planet, and now fully rigging out your boat and accessories. And when you add all that together, in my humble opinion, you get the best tackle shop in the country that's all family owned and operated right here in the Midwest. Also, more big news. Again, we've told you the past couple weeks that we have a brand new coupon code for you guys to use at ALF from here on out. No more Tackle Talk 10. Now we are going to be using Tackle Talk 5, all one word, Tackle Talk, the number 5, but that code gets you 5% off. The big part, like we've said, not only is it on regularly priced items, which is what our old code was only good for, now you can stack this code on sale items as well. So you can take an extra 5% off the great sales that ALF already runs, and that was the thing we heard about our last coupon code was like, hey, I like to use it, but obviously there's a lot of things that I can't use it on because ALF runs so many sales. Well, now you get the best of both worlds. You get to use a discount code, you get to take advantage of the sales, and you get to use them together, which means even bigger savings. In my opinion, a much better option. It works on regularly priced and sale items. Again, the code is Tackle Talk 5, so be sure to use that code Tackle Talk 5 at checkout from here on out for even more savings on regularly priced and sale items over at AmericanLegacyFishing.com. Also, again, very, very quickly, coming up this weekend, February 7th, 8th, and 9th, I will be at the Columbus Fishing Expo all 3 days. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I will be there. We'll have a booth. We'll have some awesome merch that you guys at the expo will have the exclusive opportunity to get your hands on first. If we have anything left over, it'll go to the website afterwards for you all. Obviously, we have some new stuff coming anyway after that, but we have some cool designs, some cool apparel. We have mugs, we have keychains, we have all kinds of stuff that we'll have at the expo. Also, we will have very limited edition micro buzzes in a very special color, all of which will be individually numbered and signed. So keep your eyes out for that. Very limited number, first come, first serve, that'll be available at the expo. We also are going to be doing seminars. So I'll be doing one on Friday, February 7th at 1:30 p.m. on stage A. And then I'll be doing another one on Saturday, February 8th on stage B at 2 p.m. So those two seminars are going to be about maybe my favorite thing in the world, top water. So you don't want to miss it. We're going to go into anything and everything top water in those two seminars. If you happen to be around, stop by. Again, it's Friday, February 7th at 1:30 p.m. on stage A, and then on Saturday, February 8th at 2 p.m. on stage B. So stop by, say hey, but other than that, there'll be a ton of great seminars going on. Mike Iaconelli will be there. Fred Rabanis will be there. So mark your calendars, February 7th, 8th, and 9th, the Columbus Fishing Expo in Columbus, Ohio. Also, a very special announcement announcement here. We're going to have a bonus episode, a short episode that will be dropping tomorrow on Wednesday when you're listening to this, and it is going to be a preview of the Columbus Fishing Expo with a very special guest who happens to be one of the two names I just mentioned a minute ago that will be there. Our buddy Mike Iaconelli will be joining us tomorrow to do a really quick preview of what you can expect at the Columbus Fishing Expo. So again, February 7th, 8th, and 9th, this coming weekend in Columbus, Ohio, we'll be there, and we have a bonus episode dropping for you tomorrow with Ike to talk about what you guys can expect at that expo. All right, everybody, today is the final day of Breaking the Mold Volume 2, which, as you know by now, is a 4-part series that's dedicated to some of the most innovative products and companies in the fishing industry today on the tackle side. So episode 1 was Flint Pierce at Battle Baits. Episode 2, Josh Plades with Clutch Swim Baits. Episode 3 was Dan Miguel with Great Lakes Finesse. And today, for episode 4, we are fortunate enough to be joined by a true titan of tackle making, a gentleman that has made, created, designed, and produced just about every type of bait under the sun, but he's really made his mark in the balsa crankbait world, and it's Cliff Pace. Now, you probably know Cliff as an angler. Most notably, he won the 2013 Bassmaster Classic, but he also has multiple wins throughout Bassmaster and Major League Fishing. Now he's back at Bassmaster this coming year, but a very decorated professional angler in his own right, but maybe even more so than the pro fishing side, he's known throughout the tackle world as the owner of Black Label Tackle. And today we're focusing on his legendary balsa crankbaits to give you guys a true behind the scenes look at the design and the production of some of the coolest old school and new school crankbaits that you'll find out there today. And if you want to check out his baits, you can do so at woodbaitcountry.com. They've got everything over there. No discount code today for reasons that you'll hear in our conversation. These are already some of the most affordable handmade balsa crankbaits on the market. And when you hear about the amount of work that goes into each and every one of these baits, the everyday price tag will shock you as a deal in and of itself. So let's not waste any more time here. We are going to jump straight into this great conversation with the owner of Black Label Tackle, Cliff Pace. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are joined today by 2013 Bassmaster Classic champion, multiple wins across Bassmaster, Major League Fishing. You're headed back to the elites this year, so good luck to you. We're excited to watch you. But most importantly today, the owner of Black Label Tackle, it's Mr. Cliff Pace. Cliff, buddy, thanks so much for stopping by today to talk to us.
Yeah, man, it's always a pleasure.
So I'm excited. I think I told you before we started recording, this is the 4th and final episode of a series called Breaking the Mold, where we wanted to end it with a bang here, but it's just basically focusing on 4 companies that really are pushing and innovating and really great lure designers, and there is no one else in the tackle industry that describes to a T. I mean, you're not going to find someone who I think is more of like a jack of all trades when it comes to every different type of lure. I mean, you got soft plastics, you got wire baits, you got, balsa on the crankbait side. So again, I appreciate you just stopping by and letting us kind of pick your brain on the design side today.
Yeah, man, I've been messing with this stuff pretty much my whole life. Black Label kind of started the year after I won the Classic. I broke my leg, and I'd always made balsa baits, for my own personal use and just for fun. I'm just a tinkerer. I mean, and making tackle for me is really just always kind of been about basically building a better mousetrap, right? I got into making jigs because I wanted to make jigs not really to sell, just for my own personal use. And then that ended up becoming a centrifugal casting company that we make everything now for our own brand, for V&M, for a lot of other OEM accounts. I've been able to design a lot of baits for my sponsors. And then, the balsa thing really got kicked off when I had that year where I broke my leg. I couldn't fish the tour that year. The doctors wouldn't give me a release to fish on crutches. And I kind of spent that year more or less just fine tuning the process and making, because my first balsa baits were crude, man. I mean, they were fishable, but they weren't pretty. And spent a lot of time doing that. And, now about 2 years ago, kind of dove off in the soft plastic world, which is what I'm doing right now. I built my own, built an in-house injection shop. And making all of the Black Label soft plastics here, also doing some OEM stuff, kind of like the lead game where, manufacturing some products for some other brands. as well as my own brand. And I mean, it's just what I like to do. I mean, it gives me the ability to have anything I want to fish with. And it also gives me the ability to, no different than what you're doing now. Like, you did this podcast because you love to fish, right?
Right.
I mean, that's why you're willing to occupy days of your life talking about it and setting up everything that you've set up, a studio and so on and so forth. Well, making baits is kind of my version of that. You know, this keeps me connected to what I love when I'm not doing it. And it also, you talk about, you know, you mentioned earlier, we were talking about how many SKUs I have and everything. I mean, all that derives from me fishing. You know, if I go fishing and there's a scenario where I want a certain bait to do a certain thing, I mean, most people have to go look for that bait and research it and talk to them about it. I just come make it. If I need a jig with a bigger hook or a smaller hook or a different size of weight or whatever, I can just make it. If I want any balsa bait or crankbait to do a certain thing, have a certain action, I can pretty much build that. And now I have the same ability with my soft plastic. So, you know, for me, there's a lot of satisfaction in catching a bass on a bait that you built, no matter what kind of bait it is. And I think that's why you see so many people getting into it. The do-it-yourself thing in the fishing world has really grown. You know, in the last 10 years, there's all. I mean, I'm really good friends with a good sponsor of mine and a good friend of mine named Lance at Kirby Design and Manufacturing. He makes, you know, small and large scale injection molds for soft plastics, and it's amazing to me how many small molds he's constantly making it. There's that many guys out there that are doing this as a hobby. But I get why they're doing it, because it's really cool to catch a fish on a bait that you say, hey, I made this.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's just, I guess it's something that's in some of our blood, and then other people don't want to mess with it at all, which from a business standpoint, that's good for me because I get them to buy my stuff.
Can you remember when, like, the tackle bug, or the tackle making bug, first hit you? Like, I'm sure it was pretty early on, but do you remember a time where you're like, okay, I am taking this into my own hands now? Was there a vivid memory that you have of that?
I think my whole life.
Really?
I mean, even when I was a kid, you know, when I was a kid growing up, you know, I grew up in South Mississippi. We fished a lot of the tidal rivers. And back then, the spinnerbait was the king. There wasn't a bladed jig. There wasn't a, you know, we had such a limited amount of tackle then than what we do now. And even when I was like, say, 6, 8, 10 years old, I would take spinnerbaits and take them all apart and take the skirt off of this one and the head from this one and the blade from this one, and, you know, and kind of fancy them up and take fingernail polish and paint different color eyes. And I don't know that it really ever made any difference in my fishing. But again, it's kind of like we were talking about earlier. It's something that I just like to do. I like to play with. And I started at a really young age. And I made some wooden lures prior to this, but the first wooden lures that I can like recall to a date, I made a set of, we had to do a year project when I was in high school, when I was a senior. We had to do a senior project, and you could pick that. It was kind of like a college preparation thing. You could pick if you were into politics, maybe you did some kind of paper or whatever, and you kind of could pick any subject you wanted to use that you were currently taking in school. And I was in shop class that year when I was a senior, and I actually chose to manufacture a set of balsa crankbaits in my shop class. And that was my senior project in high school. And I graduated in 1998. So I know that I've been doing it for at least that long.
Jeez, it started with a high school project.
Well, it didn't start with that, but that's the first ones I can vividly remember, like an exact date. This is a new bait that I'm making right now.
Oh, look at that.
I have to get you some video of it. Everybody is all about, you know, we all know what this is, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a scoping toy.
Scoping minnow.
But everybody wants one that rolls. And I've been messing with this one for a while. It's got some pretty cool, unique features. This is a bait that's going to be on the market very soon. And this one will roll as good or better than any I have ever seen. I'm not going to show you exactly why. But it has
It doesn't look like it has wings on it, though, right? It's not like a Sakamata shad. No.
I've done it in a totally different way.
Interesting.
Very similar profile to a Sakamoto. This is the 5-inch version. I'm working on a bigger one and a smaller one now, maybe two smaller ones. I'm not sure yet, but no wings. But I'm telling you, it'll roll. It'll roll as good as any. I'm not calling out people's brands or baits. It's just not what I do. But this one will roll as good as any of them that's ever been made.
See, that's what's so fun too, is again, like, I mean, it's what I really respect about you as a lure designer in general is like you are, I said it at the beginning, but jack of all trades. Like, yes, you make some of the best balsa crankbaits in the country. You also can say, you know what is a big deal right now and I can probably improve on, and to your point, make a better mousetrap. I bet I can make a rolling minnow. So, and everything in between. You got spinner baits, you did the V&M jigs, the pacemaker jigs. I mean, you've been on every spectrum of bait design.
I have, and I've been fortunate, man. I've met a lot of really cool people in my time, and I've been able to help BKK design some hooks that I think are really cool that they just released. And I've been fortunate to help some of the guys in Japan when they're prototyping some of the Jackal stuff, and they're into it like I am. I mean, they're into every little detail. But I mean, like this bait right here. I mean, this was a long process to get to here, and it's cool to really. Like I'm shooting this bait for the first time right now. I just got this mold, which is actually why I'm doing it during this podcast. I told Tiffany, she sets all this up, and I told her, I was like, look, I really want to run this mold because I'm just dying to see what it's going to do.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm just going to do it during the podcast and let everybody kind of see it. So it's cool to be able to have an idea in your hand and then actually put it, in a physical form and be able to produce it. And it's just that's fun for me, and I'm a weird wired person when it comes to that, because most people don't consider that fun, but I actually do. When things are going good, I really enjoy making baits. There's days that I don't enjoy making baits, but when things are going good, I have a lot of fun with it, and I enjoy doing it.
So I think we probably talked about before we started recording, but you have a ton of SKUs or models of almost everything you do, but specifically today, obviously, we're talking balsa crankbaits. How many different models of balsa crankbaits do you think you have now? Because I honestly don't have a count on it. I have no clue.
I don't know. I released 10 back at Thanksgiving that I had worked all year last year to design, and I think those 10 put me at 70 something.
Jeez.
76, 77, something like that.
And that's different. Like for people at home, that is different models. That is not different colors or small little variation. I mean, it's different models and lines of crankbaits that you make. Your line is so big. And
the colors aspect, we're way over, probably pushing 200 different colors. But, I mean, dude, the whole thing about a balsa bait is it's a custom bait, right? And you hear people throw around a term a lot in our industry that's called like, this is a good niche bait. Well, I really think with technology and the advancement of fishing now, for me and for most people that are really into fishing, dude, every bait is a niche bait. I mean, the fact that you can see a fish swim up to your bait and bite it or not bite it really starts making things niche baits really fast. And the balsa bait deal just keeps growing because of that exact same thing. I mean, you make I have like a very wide array of square bills, and people think, a square bill is a square bill, but it's not. I have a lot of different body sizes for where I'm trying to match different size forges. And I also have different, characteristics as far as the way that bait rolls and how hard it vibrates or how soft it vibrates. And some that are really just absolute beasts as far as coming through wood cover, and some that are better in grass cover, and some that are better when you're just cranking down basically like a bare bank or, channel swings and stuff like that. But fishing has gotten so dissected over the last decade. The amount of products and stuff that are on the market now is unbelievable. Just the amount of brands that there is unbelievable. I mean, I grew up here in Mississippi at Ross Barnett, and that's where the hollow-bodied frog got invented. And like 10 years ago, if you want to throw a hollow-bodied frog, maybe 15, let's back up 15 years ago. If you want to throw a hollow-bodied frog, you either bought a scum frog or you bought a snack proof frog. And dude, that was it.
That was it. Those were the two options.
And now there's like hundreds. There's so many that I don't even, I mean, I can't even say that I've tried them all. And I still live here, and frog fishing is still a real popular thing. And my buddies are all the time asking, man, have you tried this, tried that? And I'm just like, no, I'd have to fish daylight to dark 365 days a year and just simply test lures to be able to try everything that's on the market. But, you know, it's because of that niche aspect that I keep having more and more and more balsa baits. And dude, I'm already working on a bunch of more new ones that I'll probably release this coming year that are the same thing. I mean, they vibrate a little different, or they run a little different depth. You know, there's something different about every single one of mine. No two are the same. And the, you know, there is a time and a place where they all have their specific use, right?
Yeah, I guess that's a cool way to think about it. If you think of every bait as a niche bait, now that doesn't mean that some baits can't cover multiple niches, because they do. That's just, think of it like a Venn diagram, I guess, right? Like there's different niches. Some of them are going to overlap, and you're going to have baits that can play more than one role. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, every bait kind of serves a niche. Some niches are bigger or smaller than others, but that's a kind of a cool way to look at everything. And that is obviously how you end up with 70 plus different versions of just balsa crankbaits, plus all your plastics, plus all your wire baits and all kinds of stuff, and jigs. And so, yeah, it's cool. If we want to, I'm trying to figure out how to ask you this next question. I think what I'm going to do, I want to try to ask this in a much less cliche way than you probably get this question. So I'm sure you've been asked a billion times, like, what's the big difference between plastic crankbaits and balsa crankbaits? And, you know, you go down the list. Instead, I kind of want to hear, like, your case for balsa. So I guess really quickly, I'll get out of the way what most people are going to say for plastic crankbaits. Like plastic crankbaits, your talking points on them are probably, they're more consistent in terms of the shape of the production, the action in the water, because they're a shot bait, right? They're a molded bait. And then you've got, I'd say, like, you've got more overall appearance options, because you can go clear, you can go solid. Like there's the just physical nature of it. You've probably got that they're cheaper, and then you've got that plastic is probably easier to cast for an angler because you got all these different weighting options inside. Like that's probably the big case for plastic baits. But on the balsa side of things, what is it to you that makes balsa this kind of like really cool niche magical bait that sort of has some benefits that you just aren't going to get with plastic?
I mean, I think when you're talking about the first thing is the fact that balsa baits, even mass-produced balsa baits, like they are, you know, you strive to make 1,000 baits that are identical, but because of the material you're dealing with, even though, I mean, I can sit down and make 1,000 baits with the equipment that I have, which is the state of the art you can buy, and I make 1,000 baits, and I know that they're not identical. I mean, they look identical, but I can't control certain things like the density of the wood, or, I mean, dude, I'm in a controlled environment with all kind of dehumidifiers and central heat and air. I mean, we try to control everything as much as we possibly can, but the fact that they are all different, I think, is part of what they're kind of their appealing or their cult following kind of comes from. But if you talk about crankbaits to a lot of guys, you see a lot of people talk about like a certain bait that say it's plastic, and they say, man, you know, this bait swims like balsa, or they compare it to balsa. To me, balsa is just, it's the standard, right? I mean, there's something about the way a balsa bait swims in the water. The other thing is a balsa bait. So no matter how, let's talk about like a square bill, okay? No matter how fat you make a square bill, unless you were to inject it with something to give it flotation, you'll never make it as buoyant as a balsa bait. You can't take a 2-inch by 1-inch shape that's plastic filled with air and make it as buoyant as what a balsa bait can be. That's why your little fat body balsa baits, they're oftentimes a little heavier than a plastic bait, and they're still more buoyant. And that's what makes them come through cover so extremely good. And that's just something that plastic doesn't enable you to do. There's actually been some companies over the years that have made exactly what I'm talking about. They've taken like a plastic shell and filled it with a foam or a resin to add flotation to it, and an achievement. So for me, I mean, rather than doing that, I just assume just make it out of what works, you know. And then like the other thing that balsa bait's super popular about has always been like flat baits. like cold water, flat side. That's like the East Tennessee kind of where it got started thing. There's just something about the way a balsa bait swims. And another aspect I think a lot of people don't talk about or think about, balsa baits have a different density than what a plastic bait does. And when your hooks, like people talk about crankbaits being silent or rattles or this or that, there's no such thing as a silent crankbait unless you take the hooks off of it. If you get in a swimming pool and throw any crankbait that has hooks on it, it makes noise. But those hooks touching balsa make a lot less noise than they do touching plastic. So you can get more of a stealthy type, presentation out of having a bait made from balsa wood than what you're going to get out of a bait made from plastic, just because of that aspect. Even if both are manufactured to be silent and with the intention of being silent, just the hook contact on a plastic bait is going to make more noise. But the main thing about a balsa bait, the main thing is, in my lifetime growing up, I grew up fishing with balsa baits, and the reason why I started making them, honestly, when I was young, is because there was a time period that you couldn't get them. It wasn't that I wanted to make them for anything other than the fact that I wanted them. I couldn't get the ones that I wanted anymore. They weren't available. And honestly, I think if Takahira hadn't won the Classic on a balsa bait, that it might have just completely kind of faded away, because they are super difficult and super time consuming to manufacture. But when he won the Classic, it kind of created like a resurgence, and it was good for guys like me because now there was baits on the market again to buy. But a lot of the baits that came back were built different. They weren't the same. That's what the originals were. But what I'm trying to get at is, over my years in my life, not only just Black Label baits, but other brands, I've found occasionally like this magic bait, right? That it just seems like a fish would swim around any other crankbait to eat that one. And I might have 50 there, exact same model, exact same color, but there's something about this one. And I've brought them magical baits back to my shop and destroyed them, trying to figure out what makes this one so, and you can't figure it out. But I've never had a magical plastic bait ever in my entire life, with the exception of a few jerk baits. I've had a few Jackal jerk baits that there was just something about them that there was just that one is just the one, But the flaws that come from producing it out of balsa is what also makes it great, right? That's how. So when a guy buys a balsa bait and he goes fishing, especially like on public water, he has a bait that maybe he doesn't feel like is exactly like Joe, who just fished down this bank an hour ago. He has something that's different. And I think that's what makes it appealing.
Yeah, I like, you don't get that with any other bait, where you do have that. I don't know if it's mojo, I don't know what it is, but you buy 15 of the exact same balsa bait, and there is the one that, like, your house is on fire, you would run into the house fire and try and save that one balsa bait because it's just got something in it. Like, I know guys that would probably run in and grab their old Zoom or their old, wee bait or whatever and be like, dude, exactly. I gotta have it.
But as technology has improved, I think now, we're building baits now that are way more consistent. I feel like my Black Label balsa baits are more consistent than any of the balsa baits that I had growing up. And it's not because those guys weren't great at building baits. It's just I have better stuff to do it with.
Right. Better
just
equipment
like the advancements in technology and everything else. The same thing has happened, in technology that I use to manufacture my baits with. So, I have everything here I need. I have a CNC machine. I have the machines that cut my blanks. I can make my lead shop. I can go in there and make any insert, any ballast. If it needs to be, if it doesn't need to be a quarter, if it needs to be 13/64 or whatever, I can produce it to the exact standard, and then I produce it myself, so I know it's produced repeatedly, consistently, and I feel like we're making this, or I'm, as good of a quality control as what is possible in the world of balsa, and I don't say that you can't still find those magic baits, but the overall, years ago, you'd buy 15 baits to find that one, but you'd throw 5 of them in the garbage because they wouldn't even tune. Well, every bait we make is tuned before it leaves here. So that's a fear with some guys about balsa baits, is they don't want to spend the money and buy half good ones and half bad ones. We tune every one of them here to make sure that they're all going to swim and they're all going to do what they're supposed to do before they get to the customer.
So let's talk production then. I think it's one of the really cool parts about balsa in general. So I read at some point, I don't know if this is still true, I believe it was in the product description one time that I was reading of one of your baits, that something like a 45 or 46 point process from start to finish basically for your balsa baits, which is insane. But I don't doubt it because they are a very labor intensive bait to make. You don't have to give us all 45, but like, can you sort of at a high level take us through the life cycle of a Black Label balsa bait from the time it is hunk of wood until it ends up on the deck of our boat?
Yeah, so we're going to start with, just for lack of better words, we're going to start with a 2x4 that come from a balsa tree, right? So we've got our piece of wood, and the first thing we're going to do is sort. So when I buy wood, I buy a pretty good volume, and I'm going to sort it by density, and when that's done by weight. So say we get 1,000 sticks of wood. We're going to go through there and sort them by weight. And I have certain models that are built for certain density, around certain density woods, and other models that are intentionally built around heavier densities of wood. So once all the wood is sorted, and I try to just use heavy and light. I don't try to do make it too complicated, but there's certain baits that I'm going to use light wood for, and certain baits that I'm going to use heavy wood for. So that we're going to grade the wood. Then we're going to shape our body. Once the body is shaped, it has to be sanded, polished, and sealed. And it's going to get sealed twice. And then once it's sealed, I'm going to insert the ballast, which is also the front hook hanger. Once the front hook hanger is installed, it's going to get put on a set of paint sticks, which if you watch any of my videos, you'll see me painting them on these little wire-looking sticks. And I make sticks that hold 6 baits at a time. It's going to go on a set of paint sticks, and then it's going to get dipped anywhere from 6 to 10 times, depending on what all coatings have to go on it to generate that color. So say, just for simplicity's sake, if I was making a chartreuse and blackback square bill, which is a color that everybody can recognize, so it's going to get dipped, in sealer coats multiple times. May have to do some sanding in between some of them. Then it's going to eventually get dipped in white, and then I'm actually going to dip it in chartreuse. So then I'm taking an airbrush and I'm just painting the blackback, the orange throat, and the kill dot. Right? That's all art. That's the only artwork I have to do on that particular color. And then it's going to get a light clear coat put on it. That's the first clear coat. Then it's going to come off the paint stick. It's going to get its hardware put on it. It's going to get its diving lip. It's going to get its tail pins. All that are done. Then the bait's going to get eyes painted on it. And then it's going to get its final clear coat, which is actually applied on a rotisserie wheel. It's brushed on. It's a real thick clear coat. That's what gives mine those real thick, deep-looking paint jobs. Once that's done, then all that's got to be drilled out, because that clear coat's going to close up all of your hook hangers. Drill all that out and clean it. Put a split ring on the nose, however many treble hooks that particular bait gets. Then you're going to go, I forgot, we got to paint the eyes on it too before we clear coat it. Paint the eyes on it. Put the hooks on it, go tune it, make sure it passes its swim tests, and then it goes through packaging, gets a UPC, gets entered into our inventory system. So yeah, I mean, it's quite the process.
It's crazy. And I mean, we'll get to it in a little bit, so I don't want to spoil it. But I mean, at the price that you charge for the amount of labor that goes into these baits is kind of crazy. I don't know. How many baits do you think, if all you did was balsa baits today, how many baits can you get through in a day? I know you're a pretty well-oiled machine now, but it's still a labor-intensive process.
That's a question everybody asks me, and I really don't have a good answer, because you can't build one in a day.
That's a good point too. Yeah, you got to wait.
You have all your dry and cure time. So I try to build my baits in sets of maybe 400 or 500. And a set of 400 or 500, start to finish, from cutting the bodies to the time it can go be tuned and put in a package and go out to a customer. Unless I put like a real urgency on it, you're looking at anywhere from 15 to 20 days.
So, I mean, point gets across, right? It is not something that you physically can do in, a day or two, really. Like, this is a long process for these baits, and it is a labor of love.
No, if a guy tells you he sat down this morning and carved a balsa bait and he had it finished by the end of the day, he didn't make a very good bait.
Right. Yeah.
Just because the material it requires that you would be required to use from a dry time and so on and so forth, it just doesn't enable that to be possible. I mean, you can put a mad rush on them and maybe get some done in a week, but I don't like to do that. I just like to let everything cure the way it should. So what I'll do is I'll have them in sets. In other words, I might have a set that I'm airbrushing this week of, say, a set of 500, and then I've got a set that I airbrushed the week before that's I'm going to put the lips in. And then I've got another set that I'm shaping and sanding and getting ready to be prepped to paint. So it's kind of a cycle deal.
It's more efficient that way too, for sure. So
absolutely.
Can you, I've seen videos before of you making these baits, and you have this machine, and I mean, my dumb brain, I had no idea how the bodies were actually cut on these things so that they are just as consistent as possible. You have this machine, I can't remember what you called it, like a replicator machine or something, basically, that that almost takes, like, it looks like an example, and then it copies it basically by like turning and rotating and cutting.
You got your head wrapped around it pretty well. Yeah.
Can you explain it better than I can, though, to like us just simpletons?
I can try. It basically, whatever shape you want to make, you have to make a template for it. We call it a master.
Okay.
And it has to be made out of, it can't be balsa wood. It's got to be something really hard. I could hand carve one out of something really hard, like maybe walnut or hickory. Or I could make one, I could get my machinist buddy to make me one out of aluminum. And that's your best play, because that's forever. You ain't got to worry about walking out there one morning and dropping the hickory one and it cracking.
Right. You're like, oh no, I got no master anymore.
Aluminum's good to go. As long as we don't lose it, we're good. So you put your master in this machine, and then basically it has a set of roller wheels that touch the master, that transfer the shape of the master to a saw blade, and it's all in timing. So as the master pushes forward, the wood pushes forward, and it enables the saw blade to trace out the shape of the body.
So how long does that process before it can make its way all around and like fully carve it?
It depends on how long the body is. So
okay.
Like if I was making, let's just say if you were making a 2-inch square bill, you might could cut one of those in a couple of minutes. But if you were making like a 5-inch wake bait, you might be looking at like a 5 or 6 minute body.
Got it. And how many can it do at a time? Do you have to do them one at a time, or are there multiple?
My machine will cut 2 at a time.
2 at a time. Okay. So again, that's just a long process in general, just to get the bodies done, because you do have to do 2 at a time for, a couple minutes at a time. And then you're trying to do runs of 400 or 500 of these things. I mean, again, you guys listening at home are starting to put together this, just the time intensity of making these baits.
If you could cut one a minute,
yeah,
that's 60 baits an hour. So if you need to cut 600 baits to start a set, that's a 10-hour day.
So then, as far as like the design of the baits themselves, I think that's really cool, because there's almost 2 camps of, at least I think anyway, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, on your balsa baits. I think you have baits where in balsa, sometimes it's not necessarily how far you can push forward and do something nobody's ever seen. It's the opposite. It's like, can you bring this beloved bait that someone made 20 years ago or whatever, that has this lore to it? Can you bring it back to life? Can you replicate it back to what everybody remembers of, like, the old Zoom WECs and like all that type of stuff that just have this lore to them? And you have like both kind of baits, right? I think you have baits where you've like probably been in bed and you've thought this up and I want to go make it. And then you have ones that are like, no, can I bring back and resurrect this really timeless bait that people want produced again? How does that design process differ? Like, obviously I know one, you have some hard inspiration, one, you have an idea, but
bringing the bait back to life or starting from new is really about the same as far as the process goes. The most of the baits that I brought back to life, the majority of them are either baits that I personally fished with when I was a kid that aren't made anymore, or so I've done some. I've brought back some of the baits that Mr. Ed Chambers made, and the reason that I brought those back is because that machine you were talking about, the one that I own,
yeah,
that was Ed's.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, that was the machine that Ed cut his.
Oh, wow. There's been a lot of history on that machine.
When he died, I was fortunate enough to purchase that from his family.
Wow.
They knew I made baits, and I had a mutual friend that knew them. I didn't know them, but he did. And he called me and said, man, I think they're interested in selling this machine, because the balsa bait thing was totally Mr. Ed's. Nobody else messed with it. It was his deal. And I think it was kind of his escape from the multi-million-dollar a year company that Zoom became. So it was kind of his hobby. He didn't really care if he sold one or not. So whenever he passed away, it kind of passed away with him. And when people found out that I had bought his equipment, they started asking, man, can you make this one? Can you make that one and this one and this one? And so I've brought back maybe 6 or 8 of his that either dear friends of mine have asked me to bring them back, or, a lot of people have contacted me through Facebook or whatever. Or maybe some of them were even baits that I like, because look, I was a fan of WEC. I've got hundreds of WECs, and everybody that comes to my house and sees them is like, why do you not sell these? You make, and I'm like, no, I'll never sell one. I mean, they mean something to me. So, but to answer your question, as far as the process, the process is pretty much the same as far as what it takes to get it there. The making the new bait from scratch that's in my brain is probably going to oftentimes take more prototyping than what a recreation bait's going to take. But you'd be surprised. I mean, man, dealing with these balsa baits, you're walking a fine line between making a great bait and making a piece of firewood that's really small.
A turd, yeah.
I mean, just because it has a lip on it and has some weight in it does not mean it will swim. I have guys message me all the time that are, doing it at home, and they're like, man, dude, I've built 38 square bills and I haven't made one that runs straight yet. You have any advice? And, my advice is pretty easy. You need to build 39.
So when you do have these new baits come to you, like, how does that usually work? Are you usually out on the water and you just see some situation that your brain goes, you're a self-admitted tinkerer and all these niches and stuff. 100%. You're like, man, if I just had something that was a little bit skinnier or ran half a foot deeper or whatever, is that where these come from?
100%. Every bait that I've made is 100% been thought of on my ride home from fishing. Like, yes, you go fishing, you run into a scenario, and oftentimes they're exactly what you're talking about. Needed one that was a little smaller, a little bigger, a little tighter, a little wider, a little deeper, a little shallower, a little whatever. And then it's to the drawing board. And, the more you do something, the easier it gets. I've designed so many now that I can look at something, and I have a lot of history with this, and I can kind of put myself in the ballpark pretty quick. But even still, like some of the black label baits that I've designed that are out of my own head, there's some that I've built like 40 or 50 or 60 prototypes of. I'm talking the exact same body. I'm not talking about anything. I'm talking about different weights, different weight placements, different bill sizes, different bill angles, different points of line tie pull, just on and on and on and on. But I mean, if that's what it takes to make it right, if I don't want to fish with it, I don't want to sell it.
Right.
I don't have any use for it. Like I told you in the beginning, I did all this originally. It's for me, right? I mean, that's the whole. It's always been. I make stuff that I want to fish with, and if I'm fortunate enough for other people to like it, that's just a bonus.
Yeah, I guess the more you do it, your margin of error gets smaller. Hopefully, like the more you do it, like you said, right? You're closer to what you're trying to do at the beginning. It doesn't mean that it's not going to be perfect. Doesn't mean that you can't have these 1s or 2s that you got to go through 40 or 50. But for the most part, I mean, with time and experience, you are able to kind of diagnose close to what you need off the bat.
Yeah, you can look at a bait that has a problem and you're not lost. I remember the last bait that I built that just was like, I'm going to beat this bait with a sledgehammer. I built a bait called a rock hound. And I really pushed the envelope on that bait. I wanted that bait to run really, really deep because, it's kind of like a wart style bait. And I ran into so many situations in my life where, like in the spring when it was cold, they would bite a wart, but you feel like 90% of the fish are like 2 foot deeper than you can get your bait.
Right.
And so I was trying to kind of push the envelope of what is really reality to begin with. And that particular bait, that rock hound, man, I made so many of those baits. A friend of mine has a lake. We have a test pond here at the shop, but it's only about 6-7 foot deep, and I couldn't test that bait. And a friend of mine has a lake that's maybe 10 minutes from here that has enough water depth that I can test, a 12-foot bait in it.
Yeah.
I bet I burnt 15 tanks of gas driving back and forth 10 miles at a time and kept on fighting. And honestly, man, I would have totally just scratched it and gave up. But I had a really good dear friend of mine, and he wanted that bait for the same reasons I wanted it, and he wanted it just as bad as me. And he just kept on asking me, man, did you get it to do right? Did you get it to do right? Did you get it to do? And it kept me from just losing my mind messing with it. And I kept on messing with it and kept on messing with it and kept on messing with it. And I finally figured it out and finally got it to do what I wanted to do, have the action that I wanted to have, and run the depth that I wanted it to run. But I will say, man, that bait taught me. I learned so much by designing that bait, just about what changes that I'm making. What do they actually do to the bait from a change standpoint? And I mean, that's just the nature of it. I mean, a carpenter that's built 10,000 houses can troubleshoot stuff better than a guy that's built 10. And the longer you do something, the easier it gets. But also at the same time, the longer you do something, you start getting less satisfied with the low-hanging fruit, right?
With good enough or with the easy things, yeah.
You start trying to make baits like the rock hound, and it becomes more complicated. A bait that I made this year that we call a Mod 6, it was another one that was a lot of prototypes. And if you remember the old discontinued Risto wraps, well, those are probably some of the most modified crankbaits in history. I don't think anybody liked the Risto wrap out of the package.
Yeah, there were more mods or hacks or whatever to the Risto wrap.
Yeah, they would buy them. And when I was young, guys would be like, "Oh, you got to buy a number 5 and then take the lip out of a blah 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 and then fill this in with epoxy." And I was all over that because it was fun, and I loved doing it. So I modified a whole bunch of those old Risto wraps, and I had one that I'd modified when I was young that I really liked. And so I made me a master that was similar to a Risto wrap, the size that I wanted, which was a size 5. And I say that as a 5 or a 7. I done got confused now, but and then I built it just basically very similar to the one that I had built when I was young that I caught a lot of fish with, and it would not run. I'm talking would not, no way, no how, couldn't make it run. And then I actually built some, and I got one that would run. So when I'm designing one like that, because sometimes in balsa and designing, man, I hate to say it, but sometimes you'll just get lucky. So maybe that piece of wood was a little denser or a little heavier in the front or a little lighter in the back or whatever, and you make one that runs great. And you're like, I got it now. We know what to do now. So whenever I get to that point, I'll always build like a little small batch, like 20 or 30. And then I'll test those. And then if they're all good, then I have the confidence to say, okay, now let's build a production run. Well, that Mod 6, I skipped that step. I'm like, I got it. And I built like 500 of them and threw them all in a dumpster. None of them would run. And I've done that 2 or 3 times, throughout this deal but that's why we tune them all. Because that's the only way you can catch that. And tuning those baits as they're made helps you really stay in touch with what you're making. Because if any little thing starts to change, you instantly have that feedback,
All right, everybody, we'll get back to the episode here in just a second, but first we are brought to you in part by Dakota Lithium Batteries. And you guys know Dakota Lithium Batteries are the batteries that I've been running on my kayak for the past 2 years or so, whether it's my motor, whether it's my electronics, my ice fishing equipment, all of it is powered by Dakota Lithium. And whether you're looking for a 12 volt, 24 volt, 36 volt, they've got 48 and even 72 volts now, everything from 10 amp hour to 320 amp hour, Dakota Lithium has you covered. They're lighter, they're smaller, they charge faster, they last longer, and they come with that rock solid 11-year warranty standard. And if you want to try out your own Dakota Lithium batteries, all you got to do, go to www.dakotalithium.com and use code TACKLETALK5. That's going to save you 5% off your entire purchase over at dakotalithium.com. Great batteries, a great price, great customer service. They're there to help out. Again, www.dakotalithium.com and use code TACKLETALK5. So I got a couple more broad picture questions on crankbait design in general, like of the actual pieces of the bait and the differences that they can make. So like the first, like the bill material itself. So if people are out there looking at especially custom crankbaits, you're going to see like, you know, a circuit board style bill. So you're going to see like the PCB stuff. You're also going to see Lexan polycarbonate type stuff. What's the big difference in terms of performance for somebody if they are looking at those two bill materials?
Well, sometimes it's just simply personal preference. There's guys that really seem to like the circuit board, and then there's guys that really seem to like Lexan. But if you break it down in like a real world usage application, I can tell you this much. If you look at most of my square bills, I only make one square bill that has a circuit board lip. And it's a popular bait. It's called a CBS1. A lot of guys like it. And I made it because I had so many guys asking me, hey, do you make a square bill with a circuit board lip? So that's what the CBS1 stands for, circuit board square. And I made a circuit board square 1 and a circuit board square 2. And I make those same exact bodies with a Lexan lip as well. One's called a Wreck and one's called a Headhunter. The exact same bait. One has circuit board, one has Lexan. There's a lot of guys that like the circuit board. They think that it lets the bait pull a little bit deeper because it's thinner. And they also, I hear guys that say they like to crank grass with a circuit board bill because they think it's sharper and it'll cut through the grass better. Both very valid points. But the main reason I like Lexan in a square bill, and the reason all of my square bills have Lexan, pretty much all the baits that I make that I'm designing with the intent of fishing in cover, be it a square bill or even a deeper diving bait, like my tap out is a good example. That's a 12-foot deep diving bait that I love to crank brush piles with. Because Lexan is thicker, if you think about what you're fishing a tree that is full of cracks. A thinner lip, how many times have you got your crankbait hung and went up there to get it, and the hooks are both sitting there, you can see them, and the bait stuck either by the line tie or the bill. That thicker bill, it's going to find less cracks. It's just simple mathematics. I don't think from the fish being able to see the circuit board versus being able to see the Lexan, I don't think it really matters from a clear and cloudy standpoint. But the thickness of a Lexan bill, I think helps a bait in cover a lot. And then the thinness, if you look at a lot of my flat baits, so I only have one square bill that has a circuit board lip, but if you look at my flat bait array, you look at the Little Cliffy, the Slim, the 38, quite a few of my flat baits, the Hickster, the Peanut, they have circuit board bills. They're tighter action baits. That thinner lip lets that small profile bait get a little bit deeper. I've actually tested it. And that particular model or that particular bait, a lot of them, like the 38, I built it both ways, circuit board and Lexan when I was testing it. The same thing with the Little Cliffy and the same thing with the Slim. And I liked all three of those baits better with the circuit board lip. So it really just depends on what you're going to do with the bait, what kind of cover you're going to fish with it. But normally, like a small tight action bait will sometimes have a more natural swimming action with the circuit board lip. But any bait you're going to fish in really like primarily wood cover, it's going to come through that cover better with a thicker Lexan.
Makes sense. What about the actual just shape of the bill? So I know a lot of people know, but for those that don't, that are listening, you know, you look around the lineup of your lineup or for other crankbaits. I mean, you've got square bills, you got rounded bills, you got coffin bills. Just in a real simple scenario here, when are you going to reach for square bill versus rounded bill versus more like a coffin style or some of the other bills that are out there?
Well, a square bill and a coffin bill are pretty much, as far as the way they fish, are very similar. They both have a very flat leading edge, right? The square bill it's obviously known for, the ability it has to come through cover. And the coffin bill is known for the exact same thing, just on a little bit deeper diving bait. Your deeper coffin bill baits have always been like great brush pile baits. That's exactly what my tap out is that we were just talking about a while ago. And then your square bills are obviously great, to throw and lay down cover, wood, stumps, trees, blown over trees, any kind of wood cover. So pretty much any lip that has a flat face, it doesn't really matter so much about the sides. The flat face is what's impacting the cover. And it causes that bait, the buoyancy of balsa, as that bait's ticking along, when that flat lip impacts, it makes that bait kind of bounce up. And it's rolling those hooks up over the whatever it's impacting, which is what's preventing it from getting hung. But like your round bill baits, depending on the steepness of the bill, your round bill baits are not going to come through cover as well, but they're oftentimes going to produce a more natural swimming action. They catch less water. That's why your tight action baits you see, like a shad wrap, that's a bait that everybody can recognize as a good cold water crankbait. It's a tight action bait. It's got a round bill on it. If you built that bait, I only have one bait in my lineup that is a real tight action bait that doesn't have a round bill, and that's a Z2. And that's actually a bait that I brought back from WEC. And it doesn't have an actual true round lip. It's kind of a hybrid lip. And then I've got some baits in my lineup that have hybrid lips that I've thought up. The Prowler MR is probably one of my absolute favorite crankbaits that I own. And it has a lip that I just drew up out of curiosity to see what it would do. And it comes through cover for a 6-foot bait. It comes through cover just so good. And unless the bait casts really good, the bait pulls the way I want it to. But the lip of a bait. So if you took a round bill and you pitched it at the same angle as a square bill, most of your square bills are going to be steeper, right? You're going to get, when you pitch that bait, no matter whether that lip is round or square, you're going to get more tail movement of the bait. The bait's going to be a wider action crankbait. But when you flatten it out, like the tap out we were talking about, it's a coffin bill, but it's got a square face, but the bill comes out of it almost exactly straight. That bait is super tight in the water. And it has the action of the bait really is not determined by the shape of the bill as much as it is the angle of the bill. The bait's ability to come through certain types of cover is really what the shape of the bill boils down to.
Interesting. I think a lot of times just my dumb brain goes to the angle and the length of the bill, obviously, too, but the angle has a lot to do with the depth is what my brain goes to. And it's more the actual action of the bait.
Actually, the straighter the bill angle, most of the time on most crankbaits, the deeper they'll run.
They're just longer usually. Yeah.
They're just longer. But if you look at even your plastic baits that are real popular that are deep divers, they're straight bills.
Yeah. Versus your wake baits, which are just straight down and they're the polar opposite.
Yeah. You just went from total ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
A wake, like you just said, a wake bait or like a 1-foot diving bait, you have a very, very, very downward angle on the bill, which is just causing a wobble without creating any depth. The less angle you take off that bill, the higher you raise that bill up, the less action the bait's going to have as far as, and the deeper it's going to go.
So what about like ballast weights? That's another thing that just kind of blows my mind sometimes, like just in terms of the pure weighting of these baits. So how do you determine how much weight goes into each of these models, where the weight goes, and is it really finicky? Like if you change where that weight is, even millimeters, I mean, it's a totally different bait.
Yes, it can be. And the reason why is because, so your piece of balsa, your blank is floating. Same thing with a plastic bait. So it's sitting on the surface. Well, if you move the weight forward, you change the angle at which that bait is sitting. But when you change the angle of the bait, you change the angle of the bill. So if you had a bill angle that was like this when the bait was straight, and you move the weight more forward, now when the bait sits in the water, the bait rises, the bill goes with it. So you would have to compensate. If you move one, you're forced to move the other. So that's kind of a balancing act. As far as how much weight to put in there, that's just kind of trial and error. If I make a new bait and I'm not sure the first ones that I build, let's just say I make a bait and I think it should take a 4-gram weight, but I'm not sure, I might make a batch, a half a dozen with a 3, a half a dozen with a 4, a half a dozen with a 5, or maybe even, I actually have 3.5s. You're talking about grams here. So 7 grams is a quarter of an ounce. And I have weights in increments of half grams for different baits because it makes that much difference sometimes. So yeah, I might make some with a 3, a 3.5, a 4, 4.5, and a 5, knowing that I'm going to sacrifice those 30 blanks to figure out exactly. Like a lot of times, if I have a shape in mind and I know I want it to be a straight bait, a straight little slipped bait, right? Then I will I'll play with the ballast to get the flotation that I want as well as the action that I want. Because when you adjust the ballast, whether you realize it or not, if you adjust the ballast, you're changing the bait. Just like a jerk bait. If you take a jerk bait and you put a suspend dot right under the bill, okay, you're going to make that bait go deeper because it's nose down. But if you put that suspend dot on the tail, the bait might not run at all.
Yeah.
Or it might jump out of the water.
Yeah, so look it up at the sky, yeah.
Right. So a crankbait's the same difference. If you move it forward or backwards or increase it or decrease it, you're changing the angle of which that bait is contacting the water.
A delicate process for sure, yeah. And then you have to make sure that it is the exact same spot every time.
I have a fixture that I've made for all the baits that I manufacture. Each one has its own fixture that's used to install the belly weight to try to center it as best as possible and ensure it's in the same spot each
Something
time.
that goes around the outside, basically, and it's almost like
each one mounts on a drill press.
Okay.
And then the bait it's made to fit that particular blank. You put the blank in it, and it aligns it to where the hole's in the same spot, the same depth, everything. That's why a lot of guys that call me are like, man, I have this bait that I used to fish with, and I can't get them anymore. Could you build me 10? There's just no way because I have to build all that. I have to draw a CNC file. I have to build an aluminum master. I have to build fixtures for the weight. I have to go through that process of figuring out exactly how much weight. Because even if I took his old bait and he said, man, I've got one that's busted that you could tear apart to figure out how much weight goes in it. Well, I can't even do that really because I don't know what density of wood they use.
Right. There's just too many variables. Yeah.
It's kind of a start from scratch every time deal. But once you have it and you have that recipe, for lack of better words, it's pretty repeatable. But the process of getting there can be very time consuming.
So one of the final pieces of the crankbait that you were talking about is obviously tuning them, making sure that, when we get one, that it's been hand tuned and it's been made sure before it leaves your shop that it is as it's supposed to be. I think sometimes for people that might be new to this kind of stuff, I think tuning is an intimidating word and it doesn't need to be. It's not that, crazy of a process. Get you a pair of pliers and go out and tune your bait. But I think a lot of times people hear tuning for the first time and they're like, oh, that sounds like a really labor intensive process. For people that have never tuned a crankbait or people that have a crankbait that's running a little wonky, can you give us the basics on tuning a crankbait for folks?
Yeah. So essentially all you're going to do is you're going to cast the bait out. And if the bait runs when you're looking at the lure coming back to you, if it runs to your left, the eyelet that the split ring is attached to, more or less the line tie, not the split ring itself, but the eyelet that's molded into the bait that the split ring attaches to. If your bait runs to the left, you're going to bend that to the right. And then you cast it again, and if it runs to the right, then you bend it too far. You need to bend it back to the left. So you're bending it left or right to adjust the pull point so that it comes back in a straight line. I think one of the things that'll probably help people more than anything else is when you tune a crankbait, put some speed on it. If you can get a crankbait if you're trying to tune a bait and get it tuned just right, put some speed on it. Because when you put some speed on it, if it'll track at a high rate of speed and be tuned at a high rate of speed, when you're fishing with it, it's tuned perfect. When you speed a bait up, you'll magnify any flaw that there is. So if you reel it back at a normal rate of speed and it only goes off to one side, say a foot, you say, oh, that's okay. If you speed it up, it might run off to one side by 5 feet. So, and having a bait that's properly tuned, like a square bill, when you come through like a tree with it, you don't want it to lose itself and run off over there 7 feet before it starts vibrating again. And that's a sign of a bait that's not tuned, right? Or a bait that's just not balanced well or designed well. I've built lots of those baits, but if you'll speed it up when you're tuning it, check it at a high rate of speed. When you get it running a straight line at a high rate of speed, and I'm not talking about trying to tear the handle off your reel, but faster than what you would do. Don't just creep it along. Because if you're just creeping along, you're really not telling yourself anything.
So then the last thing, I guess, about these that I want to hit really fast before we let you go is the price of them. Like, it's something that I've always been impressed with. I mean, when you hear this whole thing, people are going to listen to the last, 45 minutes to an hour here, and they'll be like, oh my gosh, these baits got to be, $25, $30, $35 a piece, just all of the time and design and everything that goes into them. Your baits normally are like, what, $17.99? Most of them are.
Yeah, we have 2 price points. Some of our longer baits, because of things we talked about earlier, because of the time it takes to cut them and all it's an extra hook, it's an extra set of hangers, an extra ballast. Like some of our 3-hook baits, they're $19.99. It's more material, it's more time. But most all of our baits are $17.99, with the exception of our Signature Series baits, which are $19.99. And like people ask me all the time, well, what's your Signature Series? Well, the Signature Series family is just lives inside of certain models. Some of our more popular models, like the Black Label Wreck, is one of our very popular square bills. I have a lot of Signature Series colors that I make in the Wreck, and all they are is just they're the exact same bait, but they're just fancier finished. A lot of them are full finished, and I'll put more effort into painting those. And I actually take and sign and put the year that they were made on the bottom of each one of them. And they're $19.99, and it's it's a $2 upcharge just for the additional amount of time that goes into them. Because, like I say, they are, if it takes me, say, 6 hours to paint 100 standard colored baits, it might take me 10 or 12 hours to paint 100 Signature Series colors baits. So it's the extra time. But mainly the price point on this, there's a lot of guys that make balsa baits and sell them for anywhere from $25 to, I've seen them go as high as $100. And that's fine. That's fine. I've just always tried to, I guess, be fair with my pricing. I'm not in this to try to price gouge people. But I also don't want people to think that I make a subpar bait because my price point is cheaper than most of my competitors. I'm just trying to be realistic to my customers, right? I do the same thing with my plastics. My plastics are some of the better manufactured plastics that there is, but the price point, it's under most brands that are out there. But the main reason why I can have that price point on like my plastics and my balsa is I've got everything under one roof. I'm not having to outsource to get.
There's no middleman.
Cut.
Yeah.
I'm not having to outsource to have my ballast weights made. I'm not having to outsource to have my blanks made. I've spent the money over the last decade to bring all that here. If I run out of a color Black Label balsa bait, it's on me. I have to go make them. I physically paint every one of them. And the same thing with my plastics. I mean, I'm in my plastics division right now, and I make it all right here. And I brought it all here for 2 reasons. The first thing was I feel like that's the number one way to have quality control. It's the only way that I can ensure that it's made the way that I want it to be. I'm not depending on another supplier that may or may not have my best interest in mind. And the other thing is price. Because I'm my own manufacturer, I'm not marking up somebody else's work, right? I'm just selling my own personal work. And I have thought about going up on price because the price of paint, man, has went.
The price of almost everything's went down in the past 5 years.
Yeah, but paint has went nuts. And like gallons of paint that I used to buy for $35 a gallon are now like $135 a gallon. So we're going to see what this new economy we got supposedly coming does, and see if maybe some of that stuff starts to free up and come down in price. And if it don't, we might have to go up a little bit. But if we do, we're talking like going up $1 a bait.
Still a very, very affordable balsa
It's a
crankbait.
labor of love thing. It's a labor of love thing for me, and I want people to be able to buy them and enjoy them and use them. I mean, it's that simple. I mean, I could make a way less amount of volume and charge way more and work way less and make the same amount of return at the end of the year. And I know that, but that's just not what I want to do. That's not who I am. That's not what I'm about. And I don't feel like that's good for your brand.
So if someone's listening to this, there's a kid in the car right now, there's, a guy on the way to work or on the way to the ramp right now who has never tried a Black Label or maybe even a balsa in general, and they don't know where to start because, like you said, there are 60, 70 different options for you to choose from here. What are some good starter series for them to look at? Like, maybe like a gateway balsa for Black Label. Where would you steer people for like their first couple?
Well, I could say this. Our number one selling square bills are a Rec and a 1.5. They're the two most popular models that we make in our square bills. So if a guy wants them a good square bill just to knock around with and ply and play with, I would recommend getting one of those too. The Rec vibrates harder than the 1.5. So if he fishes more off-colored water, maybe he should go with the Rec. If he fishes more, not quite as stained, doesn't need a bait that vibrates quite as hard, then he wants to go with a 1.5. As far as flat baits are concerned, if I was going to break it down to two, I'd pick the Slim and the Hickster. The Slim will always have a place in my heart because it's the first flat bait I ever made. And I've caught so many bass on that crankbait that it'll always be a special bait to me. And then the Hickster is a remake of, the WEC Hickey, which was Mr. Ed's most popular flat bait. So those are two extremely proven flat baits, and they're kind of like the Rec and the 1.5, and I'm saying this to give guys options. The Slim is a tighter action. It's going to be a little bit deeper in depth. It's better for colder water and a little bit cleaner water. And the Hickster, it's got a little bit more vibration, doesn't run quite as deep. It's more of them, got a little bit more stain, fishing a little bit shallower type bait. And that's kind of it. I mean, if you're really just looking for one to choose from, if I was going to pick a flat bait, I would pick one of those two. If I was going to pick a square bill, I'd pick one of those two. And, everything else, you start getting into like the deeper diving baits and the top water baits and all that, that's a whole other conversation. We could do a whole other podcast about it. But if I was going to pick one top water bait of mine for a guy to try, it would be a tease. There's just something about that bait. It's a prop bait that's actually shaped like a bluegill. It looks like a bluegill. And around the spawn time of the year, I actually built me 24 of them this past week in the set of baits that I was making. And they're going with me to Florida for the elite season. And that's why I'm making them ahead of time so that they'll be finished by the time it's time for me to go. And if we have good warm weather, there's a good chance that maybe I'll catch a great big one on it. But the tease is a really fun bait to fish. And it's a very effective top water bait that's made out of balsa. And as far as the deep baits go, if I was going to pick one bait for a good deep diving bait, I would look at my 300 proof. It's a really good 12 to 14 foot summertime bait. It's more subtle than a plastic bait. If guys are cranking offshore and they're fishing a lot of real pressured fish, you pull up to a group of fish and you fire that your normal crankbait in there, and the first cast, one gets it. The second cast, one gets it. The third cast, one ticks it. And the fourth cast, one won't even touch it. You pick that 300 proof and fire it in there, and another one will get it, another one will get it, another one will get it. It's just a tighter action. It's something they hadn't seen. It's kind of like what we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation. It's just something that they haven't been beat to death with, But for a deep bait, I would pick the 300 proof, And then from there, if they like them, I get people to message me every day, say, hey, I fish these conditions under this type water color, water clarity, water temperature. What bait would you recommend? They can message me on Facebook, and I'm more than happy to answer their question.
There you go. Folks listening at home, first off, there's your shopping list right there if you want to go get started and go check these out. And then it is the thing I love about, small companies in general. You guys, I've heard stories of you, like, someone writes in and they say, hey, my bait's running to the left, and you literally call them while they're still out on the water and walk them through tuning that bait. Like, that's what you get with a company like this that you don't get with the giant companies that don't know you from Adam and don't care. Like, this is why I love people that are great at what they do, passionate about what they do, but also you are a small enough operation that you care. And I think that's just something that you almost can't put a price on nowadays because it's becoming more and more rare.
Customer service is definitely a decreasing thing in our world. And I feel like, and my wife, Tiffany, look, she knows these baits inside and out too. And even if I'm fishing a tournament, a guy calls our website, he's going to get her, but I would be shocked if she couldn't answer his question. She's here with me every day. She knows these baits extremely well, and she helps people just like I do. So we do strive really hard to have good customer service and stand behind what we make. I am going to throw one more thing in here we hadn't talked about, because this is important. I think some guys might maybe venture into the balsa bait world, whether they pick up one of mine or pick up another brand, but they might want to try it. You have to treat these baits different.
That's a good point, too.
You cannot take a balsa bait out on the market and hit bridge pilings with it and slap grass off of it and hit your trolling motor with it and expect it to hold up, okay? A piece of balsa wood is essentially like compressed dust. That's why it's so buoyant. So for guys that do make the purchase to buy some of these baits, treat them with care. They'll last you a very, very long time. But if you misuse them and abuse them, I love the guy ever so often, once a year or so, I'll get a guy that says, man, I took your bait out of the package and I threw it out there and first cast and it broke. And I'm like, there's no way.
What did you really do to
it? Just tell me what really happened, and then we'll go from there, and a lot of times it's, well, I let my little boy fish with it and he hit my console. And I'm like, I understand, my daughter does the same thing. So does my wife. And at times, so do I, right? But there is a different mindset with balsa baits. I'm not saying you have to, blow them off with a hairdryer to not break them, to keep them clean, but you need to keep them from just extreme abuse, right? They won't take the abuse that a plastic bait will, and keep them out of the heat. A lot of guys leave them. You don't want to leave them on the dash of your truck for 2 years and things like that. It's causing the bait to expand and contract and expand and contract, and eventually it does damage to the bait. But if you take care of them, look, I've got some balsa baits in my boat that are 12 or 14 years old that are just as good as today that I made them 12 or 14 years ago. And they'll last a long, long time. I've got a bunch of WECs that are that were made in 2011, 2012, that have never even been fished with, that look like the day that Ed put the hooks on them, before he shipped them out. But they've stayed in a controlled environment. But that's the one thing I think guys that are new to this don't understand. And I think they get frustrated because they buy a $17 flat bait and it's cold this weekend. They take it out there and they're going down a grass line with it and it gets a piece of grass on it. And it's just instinct because they've been slapping that rattle trap for the last 15 years of their life. And they slap that balsa bait and they look at it and there's a piece of paint missing and they're mad and they're blaming the bait. It's not the bait and it's not the guy that made the bait. It's just the nature of balsa wood. They're just not as durable. They're plenty durable enough, but you can't push the limit on abuse.
Yeah, I guess the good point is they're a little bit more fragile out of the water, obviously, when you're dealing with everything we deal with. They can still take a beating in the water. That's the other thing, too. Don't be afraid to throw that thing on the lay down or, on that brush pile or whatever.
No, that's what they're made for.
Yeah, that's what they're made for. They're a little bit more brittle outside of the water, but, they are still a tried and true crankbait that is made to go off-road and underwater and go in the dirty stuff.
They're absolutely 100% very, very, very extremely durable enough to fish with for a really long time. I'm not trying to scare people off. I'm just trying to prevent people from spending their money and then making a simple mistake that frustrates them and ruins their day.
Yeah, don't throw it at the rusty bridge pylon 12 times in a row and expect it to look like it did when you first started.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And you can't do that with a plastic bait either, but there's something about breaking a bait that costs $18 that was handmade versus breaking one that costs $5.
Yeah, and it's got different breaking points. We've all had it before. You do the same thing with the $6 bait that should look indestructible and the bill pops off. It's the same thing. Every bait's got its own weak points. Yeah. So if folks are listening to this, they want to test them out or they want to try them out, I think where I've got them before is woodbaitcountry.com. Is that where you would send folks to there or to your website? Yeah. Or where would you send them?
Woodbait, if you go to Black Label, Black Label is a website that I originally had. And then Woodbait Country was a website that I helped a dear friend of mine build and create. And then he decided for family reasons to get out of the game. And Tiffany and I, my wife, bought Woodbait Country back from him. So now we have Black Label's website and Woodbait Country. And we operate them both here. When you buy a bait off of either of those websites, be it balsa or plastic, we're the one shipping the bait. We're the one that manufactured the bait. And we're the customer service team, et cetera, et cetera. It's totally us. And that's a great place. If you go to Black Label, there's actually a link on Black Label's website that you can click that will take you to Woodbait Country. I recommend people to go to Woodbait Country because Woodbait Country contains everything Black Label. Black Label's website only has kind of 8 or 10 models and not as many colors. And we've grew faster than we've been able to update 2 websites. So all of our soft plastics are on Woodbait Country. All of the balsa baits are on Woodbait Country. And there's also a good selection available online at other places. There's a lot of stuff on like Tackle Warehouse, and we have a lot of independent dealers all over the country, and we're very interested in having more. So if any of y'all listen to this, maybe have a buddy that owns a shop or you own a shop and you think that Black Label will be a good fit, a good brand for y'all's shop, reach out to us. There's a phone number on woodbaitcountry.com. You call it, you're going to either get my wife or myself, and we can both walk you through the process of becoming a dealer. Very simple deal. But Black Label is getting to where it's more and more and more available. But if you want to go to one place where everything Black Label lives, everything, every model, every color, go to woodbaitcountry.com.
Well, folks, from a guy, I mean, you heard it here over the past hour and 15 minutes. I mean, super passionate, great at what he does, a master of his craft, makes some killer balsa crankbaits and a lot of other stuff. Go over there, check out jigs, check out soft plastics, check out everything that they got over there. But again, Cliff, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing a little bit about anything and everything balsa and kind of catching up to speed on, something that I think is something that, like you said, was really popular and then kind of had a resurgence. And it's something that in today's day and age where you're looking for that different thing, you're looking for something to pick fish up from behind the boat that's in front of you and something that not everybody's throwing. Not everybody's throwing, these versus everybody's throwing jackhammers and ploppers and all kinds of stuff. You want to kind of be a little different and you want to be a little stealthy and you want to have a different action. Balsa is definitely a cool thing to turn to. We appreciate you sharing it all with us.
Hey, man, it's been my pleasure, and hopefully it's something we can do again. Maybe we can pick another topic and do another one, in between tournaments or something throughout the year.
Yeah, that would be great. Well, yeah, best of luck on the tournament trail this year. We'll be following you. Ladies and gentlemen, that is Cliff Pace. Cliff, thank you, man.
Hey, it's been my pleasure.
All right, everybody, that concludes episode 4 and our entire 4-part series for Breaking the Mold Volume 2. So I hope you guys enjoyed this series. It was a blast putting this together for you all. 4 weeks, 4 great conversations with 4 true visionaries and innovators in the tackle world that all happen to be at the head of relatively small companies who are doing work that's putting the big guys to shame. So again, a huge thank you to Flint at Battle Baits, Josh at Clutch Swim Baits, Dan at Great Lakes Finesse, and now Cliff at Black Label Tackle for being a part of this series. And of course, a huge thank you to each and every one of you that tuned in to listen. I appreciate all of you a ton. I know the 4 folks that took part in this series appreciate you all a ton. The support that you've shown these companies, Battle Baits, Clutch Swim Baits, Great Lakes Finesse, and now Black Label Tackle, it does make a huge difference to these folks and their ability to keep doing what they're doing. So thank you all. Again, I appreciate you guys. Quick reminder, we'll be at the Columbus Fishing Expo this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, February 7th through 9th. Come out and say hey. We do, again, have a special bonus episode that will be dropping tomorrow with Mike Iaconelli and Dave Hoheisel, who heads up the expo, to give you guys kind of a sneak peek at what you guys can expect to see there. So watch your podcast apps tomorrow on Wednesday. We don't normally drop Wednesday episodes, but we're about to because it's a special occasion. So we do have a little surprise up our sleeve for tomorrow for you all. But until then, as always, find us on Instagram and Facebook at Tackle Talk Podcast. Find us on the web, tackletalkpodcast.com. And we'll see you right back here next Tuesday for another brand new episode of Tackle Talk.
Thank you for listening to the Tackle Talk Podcast. Tackle Talk is produced by Andrew Hayes. Copyright 2021. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.